So first of all, I'd like to thank Matthew and Leeds for putting us on last, and you're all starving before lunch, so that's great. And before I start, I just wanted to say that all of the talks this morning have been absolutely outstanding and captivating actually. So well done to Leeds and Matthew for putting how it's been put together, so well done, and well done yous who are presenting. My name's Neeraj Bhardwaj. I'm the Digital Education Manager centrally for Information Services at the university. This is my colleague Sophie Mason. She's the coordinator for digital education and she specialises in accessibility within our department. Last year at the Alt conference, at the Learning and Teaching conference, we did a presentation on generic what is accessibility within digital education. This year we're evolving it a little bit and we're going to talk about accessibility and inclusivity by design and where we've came from and what we're doing just now within the online programs. So who are we at Digital Education? We are, she's trying to confuse me. So we actually look after the online programs within the university at master's level, and we try to come up with innovative sound approaches. But at the forefront of those approaches, we want to make sure that accessibility and inclusivity is within the design. So what I would like to get across within the aims of this particular presentation really are to explain the difference between accessibility, usability and inclusivity digitally within the online programs, and to show how we've incorporated accessibility within our online programs and tried to work towards inclusivity, because we're still trying to get there, and also to show where we've improved, but most importantly to highlight some of the challenges that we've kind of faced within the last 18 months of kind of doing this, and to highlight what we plan to do in the future, and finally to give you some tips to take back, because you always want something from a presentation to take back. And Sophie is now going to give you all of that information.
Hopefully.
I'll pass you on to Sophie.
I think I'm okay with this one.
Oh, are you?
Yeah. Hello everybody. So I'd like to start really just by talking about accessibility, usability and inclusivity. Now I'm aware that there probably will be people in the room that know the difference and are already working this way, and I apologise in advance to those people. I hope I don't bore you too much. So accessibility really it addresses it's where the legislation lies. So it addresses discriminatory aspects related to equivalent user experience for people with disabilities. And web accessibility, sorry, I'm quite nervous. And web accessibility means that people with disabilities can equally perceive, understand, navigate and interact with web content in an equal way. So with the legislation that came in 2018, which is I didn't write it down, I can't remember off the top of my head, sorry. It's it actually came from a European directive, but it's been enshrined in UK law, and I really don't think it's going anywhere despite Brexit, which is a good thing, because I think it's a really, really important topic, and I think we're all in agreement there. And basically, that gives us a sort of framework to work around about what's required, and it gives us some guidance there. So usability is where UX, kind of like that user experience design fits in, but doesn't necessarily focus on accessibility for users. So it will incorporate some parts of that, but doesn't necessarily provide that required focus for accessibility. So there might be things that are missed there. And then finally, we've got inclusivity, sometimes known as universal design. So you may have heard of it as universal design. So it tries to be kind of all things to all people, which is actually a really difficult thing to do. But it's definitely something that we have tried to work towards within our courses, but probably with more of a bent on accessibility. So the way that we've done that is to provide choice to the students and to provide alternatives for them for everything that we do. And I hope the next few slides will show you that as I go on to explain further. So I've got some case study videos from last year and from this year. It's actually 2 courses from last year that were put together into 1 course for this year. And I'd like to thank Julie Langan-Martin from the Global Mental Health team, because it's her programme that we are focusing on today. So thanks to them and the whole Global Mental Health team for allowing us to use their programme. And I hope that we'll be able to demonstrate that by incorporating accessibility at the very beginning when you're thinking about designing a course, it's actually quite easy to do, and it provides a really good experience, user experience, if you will, for everybody, not just people with disabilities. So the first set of videos, just to give you a bit of background, is going to show you how we've updated the Moodle pages themselves. Okay, so this is the course from last year. Hopefully this will work. Okay, so you can see there's actually a lot of good stuff going on here. There's great images. What you might notice, might be going too fast, there's no alt tags there, and it's actually quite difficult to see what goes with what. And then this is this is a week's worth of content here. So there's a lot going on this page. There is some really good signposting. You can see there's labels and things, but that's an awful lot of information to process, and it's actually quite difficult for the user. Certainly it's difficult for me to focus on or realise what's the most important things there. Where's the assessment piece? Where's the forum? Where's the information? What's the most important thing to take from this week? So this is this year's version. So this is the themes in global mental health, which that course fed into from last year. So the layout there is to allow the students, so across the programme, every single course will look like this. And what that does is it gives them some consistency across the piece, and allows them to know exactly where to find what they're looking for. So you can see it looks very, very different. That's 1 week's worth there. So it's completely different to last year. So it's very, very clean. And you can see there you've got the learning materials, the alternative formats, the welcome video, and the task forum. So those are the key things that we want for the students. So then I'm going to go on now to talk about how we use videos. For example, last year, so back to last year's. And if we click on the video there, you can see it opens in a pop-up, which actually isn't recommended at all when it comes to accessibility. And there's no audio. This is on purpose, so I can talk over it, but you'll notice there that it's actually auto-played, which again isn't recommended at all. And the reason for that is the user should be in control of when that plays. And actually, when you're in public, for example, studying in public, you don't want a video to start playing automatically, because that's quite embarrassing. It can be. And you can see there as well, there's no closed captions. So this year, when they click on the learning material, it opens within the same browser. And when they start the session, they're in complete control over when things happen, when things are played. Nothing happens automatically. So we've got the video here. And when you press play, you'll see that there are closed captions. We provide those on all videos as standard. And those can be turned on and off as well. So like the user's always in control of what they want. It's about giving them a choice of how they want to view the material. Oh. So this is like a narrated slide set. This is from last year. It's a local storyline. It's actually the same suite as the last, but again, we've got the autoplay feature. So there's audio there, but there's no transcript, there's no notes, there's nothing that would tell us what's happening unless you're listening to it. So you would have to listen to that for that information. So in this year, so there's actually less audio this year than there was last year. It's not so much narrated slide sets, but you can see there, again, the user is in control of when it plays. There's an audio transcript. all the time. And actually this is a templated way of viewing that. Oh, can I pause that? I'll go back to it in a second. That's actually a templated way to view the audio. So every time that appears, the student knows that that's audio. So it's just about creating that consistency for the student. Oh, stop. Okay. Okay. So in this one, this is again this year's. So I mentioned alt tags and things earlier. So in all the material that we use now, we use alt tags. And when I talk about alt tags, that's meaningful alt tags as well. It's not just medical stuff. It's something that, so the student knows what it is. So that if they didn't have the picture in front of them, they would know what that was. That's particularly important when it comes to things like images of graphs, for example, or images of data, so that the student knows what that is. And actually, we try not to put in images of data. We want it to be within the meat of the material, so that people can access that and change it if they want to. So what I should have said actually earlier is that this tool that we use, it's called Articulate. This is actually Rise, it's part of the Articulate 360 suites. And what that does is it allows us to create HTML5 content, which actually, and we publish it as HTML5, which means that the student or anybody using it can update the browser, for example, so they can change the text size, they can change the text color, they can change the text background without us having to do that for them. It's about giving them that choice. So I appreciate, obviously, not everybody has access to Articulate. It's a specialist license. But Moodle, for example, that's an HTML5 platform. So there are ways that you can create something like this using Moodle. You can use Moodle Books, for example, and it's that's still that HTML5 content. So pitfalls and challenges, we've had a few. Probably the biggest pitfall actually that we've had is this making assumptions. And I think we probably all do it. We assume that we know best, or like we've read the WCAG guidelines, therefore this is the way to do it. And actually that's not the case at all. Myself and my colleagues went to a really interesting presentation. Well, actually it was a conference last year in November. It's called the Accessibility Scotland Conference. I don't know if anyone else was there. It was a really good conference, and actually I would encourage people to go to that one, because it's for sort of it's about accessible design and things, and I think something like this really fits in there. And the biggest takeaway, and actually the theme really from all of the presentations that were there, was that you should never assume, and that really there's no better person to tell you what they need than the user themselves. So really when you're thinking about designing a course or a program, you should really get student involvement from the beginning, so that they can tell you what they need, what's easier for them, what's the best way for them to access content. Another challenge that we've actually had some opposition. I don't know if opposition is the right word to accessibility. For various different sectors, some from within our own office actually. And I actually asked my colleague, and he said he didn't mind me using this quote. But a direct quote was, "Accessibility is stifling my creativity." So that certainly was a challenge to reframe that as something to, instead of thinking about it as I can't do anything because it's not accessible, actually sort of reframe that and think, actually this is a really interesting design challenge. How can I make this content engaging and exciting, but also accessible? And there are ways to do that. So gamification, that's why there's gamification up there actually. That was the big one where people have had that sort of mindset, because certainly there are parts of gamification which probably are, or could be inherently inaccessible. But they can actually be redesigned and have thought about with accessibility at the front of the forefront when you're thinking about it, you actually don't really need to redesign at all. So if you're thinking about using, certainly games gamification is a really broad subject. But if you can use like scenario-based games, for example, they're really, they are accessible as long as they're not timed, and it's something that we actually use quite a lot. Like we don't call them games, that sounds ridiculous. But this one, for example, it's a clinical vignette, but we also use them. So a student will see a scenario, for example, and we come up to like a diagnosis. So it's story-based, and that's actually really effective, and it's also really accessible. So then the next thing I'd like to show is this is probably a really simple or simplified version, but it just gives you an idea of how something can be redesigned. So eLearning Brothers, it's a website, it's actually quite good. They have paid content, but they have blog posts which are actually really good as well. So this is one from them. You can see the top slide there. That's a drag and drop. Drag and drop is not accessible. It also doesn't work very well on iPads or mobile phones, so I would certainly say avoid that if you can. But the bottom image is actually, that's a perfectly accessible game, for example, that you could use. And it's just by reframing that and just thinking, how can I present this in an accessible way? There's the difference there. Other really accessible ways to use pop things is just like little knowledge checks, like multiple choice, fill in the blank, that kind of thing. There's myriad things available. So our top tips for providing accessible content, an accessible course: provide choice to your student, allow them to access the material how they want to access the material, whether they want to watch a video, listen to the audio, read it in a transcript. If you provide that at the beginning, you don't have to think about it later down the line. So actually, if you're providing all these things as standard, it should lessen the need for access interventions. So if a student doesn't have to come to you and ask, that's really what we're going for. We don't want the student to have to ask, it should just be there for them. Think about your content before you start. Just take that 10 minutes to think, how can I make this accessible? If it's not accessible, you don't think you can make it accessible, why not? Do you really, really need, that drag and drop? Do you need to make it that particular shade of green, for example? Use the inbuilt accessibility checkers. I noticed actually, I think Scott is going to be doing a workshop on that coming up. Is it coming up? I think so. Yeah. So just about every authoring tool we have provides accessibility, inbuilt accessibility checking. So the Office suite is really good at that. Adobe has it. There's actually lots of freebie accessibility checkers online for things, for websites, for pages and things. You can use it on Moodle, for example. And the university has actually provided some resources and advice. There's web pages there which are available about digital accessibility that give some really good advice on what you can use. So lessons learned and future improvements. I would say, and I think we agree, is that although we've come a long way from where we were, we're still not there yet. And I think it should always be an iterative process. We'll never be done with accessibility. We're always going to be learning new things. There's going to be new tools coming up. Technology is going to rise to meet the challenge of accessibility. And I think it's about never standing still and thinking we're done, that's fine, because really, we should be improving it all the time. And we will admit as well that what we've done, although it's much better than it was last year, there's actually some things that we've done that actually, having learned about it, aren't actually that accessible at all, that we thought were, but aren't. The Moodle grid format that you saw, that's actually not the most accessible format within Moodle, technically. Although it is for some people, it's not for everybody. So that's something we're going to be looking at going forward. along with, I would say, the sort of standardised icons that we've used as well, the way that we've used to do that, although it's, again, it really helps some people. We suspect, and we haven't actually checked, we've not been able to do so, but for somebody using a screen reader, for example, we think that the way we've created those will be actually really difficult for somebody to use with a screen reader, but that's not an opportunity that we've had yet, but we'd quite like to going forward. So yeah, I think we would conclude that there's always improvements to be made, and as we continue to learn, we're going to continue to make those improvements, and we're hoping that to bring in that student feedback as well from the beginning, and make changes, and we'll from that as well. So thanks to these people for their help with the presentation, and thank you. Any questions?